and welcome to the third webinar of our four-part series entitled Beyond Incarceration, a hard look at dismantling the prison system and building healthy communities. My name is Daniela Lázaro Manalo, and on behalf of MCC US and MC USA, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Thus far, I just got a chat that they're not able to hear me. Can others hear me? Others can't hear me. Okay. All right, let me continue. So far this series has included the voices and expertise of practitioners and theologians on the topic of mass incarceration, as we build a thematic arc of what it means to proclaim, intervene, create, and practice in a social context that prioritizes the use of punishment as a means of social control, systemic harm, and racial injustice. Tonight, we focus on the theme of create, and we seek to respond to the question of how we might imagine and bring about alternative systems. Before I turn it over to Jess to introduce tonight's incredible speakers, I'd like to briefly go over logistics. As always, we are recording this webinar, and it will be made available online for those of you that are joining us for the first time. Please note that the previous two webinar recordings are available now on the website where you registered. We'll hear from our guests for the next hour or so, followed by 30 minutes of questions from the audience. So please feel free to post your questions throughout the evening using the Q&A feature on Zoom, which you'll find located on the bottom toolbar next to the chat feature. If you're struggling to find the feature, please feel free to chat either myself, Jess, or Kirsten, and we can assist you with posting them. I would also like to note that in addition to this webinar series, we are launching a number of pipeline to prison learning tour opportunities led by MCC and MC USA. These learning tours offer a chance for more in-depth hands-on learning about the complexities of the US criminal legal system, and they'll be held throughout this year in different places across the country. So stay tuned at the end of this webinar to hear more details on the first upcoming learning tour and details on our final webinar. As always, please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions, and thanks again so much for joining. Jess, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you for our guest introduction.
Okay, wonderful. It is lovely to join you all again this evening. My name is Jess Stoltzes-Fuller. I am the Peace Education Coordinator with Mennonite Central Committee US. And I'm joining you this evening from Goshen, Indiana, which is the traditional land of the Potawatomi and Miami peoples, past and present. And as we begin, I'd just like to honor with gratitude this land that I'm on, as well as the people who have stewarded it throughout generations. And as we begin, would just like to acknowledge the past injustices done to the original inhabitants of this land, and would invite you all to also recognize the places that you sit, that you join us in. And as you are able, I invite you to put your name in the chat, who you are and where you're joining us from. I am honored and excited to introduce you to our speakers this evening. We have four incredible practitioners here, excited to share with us about the ways that they are doing creative, transformative work around the country. Olivia Chase is a transformative and restorative justice practitioner and trainer, experienced in the design and facilitation of skills transfer in restorative justice philosophy and praxis. Olivia specializes in family reunification conferencing and peace circles with system-impacted individuals and families, as well as culture and climate programming with faith-based and community-rooted entities. Olivia brings a real rich experience working in a variety of contexts and spaces across the country. Thank you so much for joining us, Olivia. Colette Payne is an organizer, leader, student, mother, and grandmother. Her passion is to educate families to build healthier communities. She's the director of the Women's Justice Institute Reclamation Project, which is the first initiative of its kind in Illinois to be led by and for system-impacted women. In this role, she is leading the launch of an innovative reclamation center at the Pilsen X corridor that will serve as the Reclamation Project's home for arts and advocacy, mutual support, healing and connection, community building, and leadership development among women with lived experience. Colette has appeared on television and spoken at conferences, churches, and universities, and provides expert testimony before legislative committees. Thank you so much, Colette, for joining us. Welcome. Cesare Robinson is the Assistant Director of Intervention with Common Justice, working in New York City. Common Justice is the first alternative to incarceration and victim service program in the United States that focuses on violent felonies in adult courts. Cesare has experience working in different organizations, providing alternatives to incarceration. She has a Master's of Social Work and an LMSW, as well as a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. Cesare is passionate about the service disparities and the representation of people of color in all the systems that she interfaces with. She is a powerful change agent and advocate for those who are underrepresented. Welcome, Cesare, and thank you so much for joining us. And last but not least, Daryle Brown. Daryle is a restorative justice practitioner and founding board member of Nehemiah Trinity Rising, a restorative justice practice. He has been an active member of Trinity United Church of Christ prison ministry for the last 23 years. And during that time, formed the Next Movement, which is an interfaith committee to evangelize, organize, and strategize around the issue of ending mass incarceration in America. Since 2022, Daryle has been the Director of Social Justice at Trinity UCC. He also serves as the servant leader for the Justice and Witness Ministry of the Chicago Metropolitan Association of the Illinois Conference of the United Church of Christ. In May of 22, he graduated from McCormick Theological Seminary with his Master's of Divinity and has plans to research and write about the intersections between restorative justice, indigenous concepts of justice, and biblical justice constructs. So thank you so much, Daryle, and welcome. And I will hand it over to Daryle to host our conversation this evening. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us so much.
Thank you so much, Jess, and welcome everybody. This is an exciting opportunity to present this information and to share just the intellect and the experience of the folks on this panel. That introduction pretty much covered the who I am. I've been engaged in prison ministry for some time now, and specifically focused on the effort to end mass incarceration. One of the first targets of the activism of the Next Movement was the war on drugs, which clearly was shown to be a war on Black, brown, and poor peoples. We became very active with the Drug Policy Alliance and their work to end the drug war. I was convinced that this was the way to win the fight against mass incarceration. At a reception for Beth Ritchie, who was celebrating her latest book, Arrested Justice, Black Women, Violence, and America's Prison Nation, I was having a conversation with Ruth Wilson Gilmore, a University of Southern California professor and member of the founding collective of Critical Resistance. Critical Resistance, their mission was to build an international movement to end the prison industrial complex by challenging the belief that caging and controlling people makes us safe. Ruth is certainly a kindred spirit to the cause of abolition. Anyway, in our conversation, I was kind of feeling my revolutionary zeal and expressing the urgency of ending the drug war and what that would mean in reducing prison populations. About 50%, folks speculated. When Ruth posed the question, that's great. Now, what about the other 50%? Indeed, what about the other 50%? Since that time, 2012 or so, my thinking about prisons shifted from reform to abolition. In pondering the question of what about the rest of the prisoners, those not involved in drug crime, I began to see this issue through a lens that precedes a person's incarceration. What about the other 50% led me into the practice of restorative justice and an exploration of the other structural impediments to a good life, a comfortable life, and thriving communities. Yes, the blessed community. And it became obvious Our investments need to be upstream from the police, from the courts, from the prisons. We need great education for everyone. We need mental health care. We need health care. We need livable wage jobs. And we need a restorative mentality, one that brings offenders back into community instead of expelling them. Tonight, we have a wonderful array of restorative justice practitioners with both practical and lived experiences. So without further ado, let's get into their ideas on the subject of beyond incarceration, a hard look at dismantling the prison system and building healthy communities. So my first question, real generic, what does transformative and restorative justice look like in practice? How can we understand it in theory? And I'm going to take that first question to Olivia, and everyone else will also get a chance to respond.
Oh, thank you, Daryle. It's great to be in the number tonight. To meet Cesare and to have conversation with you, Daryle, and with Colette, people I know, love, and have been in the struggle with back home in Chicago. So that question for me is, it starts 30 years ago. I thought I'd been re-educated during the movement because I'm a quintessential baby boomer. I came up in Chicago during the heady times of the late 60s and early 70s. So much powerful work going on in organizing and in the struggle. But 30 years ago, this year, my dad was murdered in an attempted carjacking, not far from his home in Chicago on the South Side, neighborhood called Chatham. And it involved 5 young brothers. 3 were between the ages of 13 and 15. They had been carjacking for weeks. They'd been on a spree. The 2 oldest were just about to turn 18. So that experience for me and my immediate family took me through the whole cycle of what has happened in our community since I was a girl. And that experience has kind of brought me full circle, because right now I'm really want to meet with, talk with the men, the one who pulled the trigger, the other who ordered it. And that process is in motion, and we'll see if that's going to happen, because I have a whole different view 30 years hence. And then this other amazing thing happened to me 12 years ago. I was invited, didn't ask, didn't look for it, but was invited to work in an amazing little program called Connections. Program no longer exists, but it had been a 25-year-old program that kept incarcerated moms connected to the children and caregivers with visits and with family reunification work. And that just opened me up to this world of transformation within our communities, using this deep ancient wisdom from the Maori in New Zealand, conferencing, the Bantu in Central Africa, the Dagari in West Africa, our many First Nations in Canada, and groups and tribes in this space we call Turtle Island, the Americas. And then along the way, the activism with the Next Movement and some of the other initiatives coming out of my home church. But these experiences, the experiences of seeing what intellectually I knew, but to see close up what the separation, what incarceration does to families and to our community, the devastating impact. I got to experience it. And that changed really on an emotional and spiritual level how I began to view what's happened in this country, these 500 years, not this country, but in this hemisphere for the last 500 years. And I'm convinced that this new way of looking at how to be in community, this new old way, because it's ancient, it's powerful, how we have to live together, how we acknowledge one another, the obligations that we have to one another as fellow human beings, that this is our path forward. Do the Inuit up in the upper regions of Canada, do they have prisons? What do they do when someone missteps? Do the people in Dano over in Burkina Faso, what do they do in a tiny village of 200 when someone missteps? The view there is that there's something wrong that has crept into the community that is being acted out through the individual. Not that the individual doesn't have personal responsibility, but we also have to look at what's going on in the community. So I don't know if I'm answering this directly, but I think in places all over the world, we've got these communities that are being rebuilt, that are being transformed through the power of relationship and looking at how we are to connect with one another on a spiritual level, connect with one another in the physical, and move forward and treat one another as part of self, really. So that's my answer. It's all a very powerful, transformative thing. And that's where the hope is. That's where I see the hope. In spite of what's going on around us, in spite of this all, I see hope because I see it in places here and there where communities are being transformed through this new old way of understanding relationship.
Okay, I'm going to read the question again because it's been a while. Good answer. A lot to parse there, Olivia. The question, what does transformative and restorative justice look like in practice? Cesare, what do you think?
It's a loaded question, but I think that it means different things in different communities and to different families. It means healing in whatever way the person that's harmed feels that the healing needs to be done, but it also is community healing. And so whatever incident, might be being brought up in a restorative justice piece, it's obviously those who have been harmed, whether that's one or more people or a community, and then thinking about how we or they have gotten to that particular space. And so was it born out of poverty? You spoke to, the drugs, I don't know if you're speaking like the early 80s. I'm an 80s baby, so I came up in the tail end of that and remember seeing a lot of the wreckage. And I feel that now my practices have brought me to a lot of the results of that wreckage. So those that are like, in drug and alcohol treatments, just in incarceration due to drug crimes, or those that are, crimes that are related to usage at that particular time. And so I believe that the healing is the biggest piece, but also connecting with the community and determining specifically what do they see that healing to be. And so it's not as practitioners to come in and kind of tell a community or a people that there's this, particular prescription for whatever symptoms they're feeling. It's more to just kind of ask and be gentle. And although that there may have been something big that brought folks to this particular restorative justice or transformative justice process, also understanding that whatever the result is that we're seeking or they are seeking as a community is not going to hope it happen overnight, because this particular thing didn't happen. This wasn't an overnight thing that started. It was either one and or more systems that failed, or there was several failures, or there was missteps, or, everything, all of the above possibly. And it's kind of peeling back those layers and unpacking where there might be some things that could be done as a group. And then there might be some things that have to be done on an individual or family-based level to start figuring out how that one particular thing should not have to be, repeated in the same form or fashion.
Mhm, mhm. Wonderful. Colette, what does transformative and restorative justice look like in practice in your space?
Transformative justice and practice in my space, it had to start with me. Because, as a formerly incarcerated person, having served 4 prison sentences, doing my first prison sentence at the age of 14, and then my children having to go through that experience with me. So in order to do the work that I'm doing now, I had to heal myself first. And whatever that looked like, seeing a therapist, something that I didn't always believe in, but eventually I knew I needed it. And not necessarily knowing that my children were going to, like, okay, Ma, you're doing okay, we're gonna jump on board. Not saying that I've arrived, because I'm still in that process of transforming to be caring, non-judgmental. Like, it starts in our families, because, I was trained by Olivia and Miss Michelle on how to be a circle keeper, but I often found that even when you have these practices, it looks different when it comes to family.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, do I practice what I've learned with my family? Or do I just lash out in anger because this is my family? And do you know what I'm saying? Like, so I'm like, okay, how do I continue this practice? Check myself, understand and notice my triggers. When I'm triggered by even my family members or triggered by community members, how am I continuing to practice healing myself while educating the community and being kind? So I remember we were doing this training. I can't remember who said it, but and the question, it was like a check-in question. And it was like, how are you treating the world? And how is the world treating you?
Mm.
And I was like, okay. I got to think of the world as my community. So it starts with your thoughts. Like, sometimes, like, we human beings, we can be judgmental. Like, I can be judged. I'm gonna use I statements. And just checking myself on those judgments that I pass on others. Being understanding, being compassionate, leading with love. Yeah, and understanding that not everyone is not going to be like me, perform like me, and like think the same thoughts I think, but just, I work with the, formerly incarcerated people, and I have been incarcerated myself, and just being understanding that people are in survival mode because of our social, social status, social economic status. Like, I don't know what people going through, but the most important question to ask is, how can I help you and be of service? So it's just like being of service without judgment.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody. Yeah, Olivia, in your comment, as I look at the question, you delve pretty deep into the theory of it. Not only the theory, the history, and not only the history, the ancient history. So, I may tease you a little bit, but I get it. You're all over that. The next question is a little more specific. How do you see your work interrupting the current system of policing and incarceration? Or how do you see, right, our restorative and transformative justice efforts transforming or interrupting what's going on in our police state, in our carceral state? And I'm going to start with Cesare with this one.
Thank you, Daryle. The current work that I do, the interruption that we do is interesting because the cases and or the people that this department that I work with directly comes to us through the court. So it's somewhat of a reverse way of approaching the particular topic. And so the young people there's already been an incident that has happened in the community, and there's a harmed party and or parties, and an incident has occurred in that. And the interruption more comes towards our anti-violence curriculum. Again, like I said before, unpacking how they got to this particular incident and really unpacking, not just like day by day, we unpack the actual day, but, also connecting with what Colette said, kind of going a little bit deep into family systems and the hurtfulness that has, been caused and the pain and what has been stuffed and what has not been spoken of and what has maybe been generational and how much knowledge do they have of their people and the pain and the trauma and kind of those things that have been carried. And even, down to, I was mad at my mother because she drank a lot. She left us. We had to always go to foster care. And so then I had like a lot of disruptions in my life. And that might have trajectory may have led me to a particular area situation. And so we don't do the judgment piece, but it's more of figuring out how you got here and, how to, as much as possible, reduce police contact to that level and incarceration in that way, but then also to just speak about the police state and, to unpack that and what that has meant for, African Americans and brown folks and marginalized folks across all of the states. And so we go into, the history of that and just open conversations too, as current events come up, as we're watching the news and like horrific tragedies are happening, and leaving space for those and not just like that we have to do this anti-violence curriculum and we're going to kind of ignore everything else that's going on in folks, immediate community. So it's a both situation. And we allow for like just natural conversations. If there is police contact, how are they dealing with those? What are they saying to police? What are they not saying to police? So it's a little bit, again, it's a little bit reversed. But then there's also education that we encourage for them to give back to the community as they feel comfortable and appropriate. So is that younger people in their family or older people in their family, and where they're just like little pieces and little gems that they're able to just share out to the community, not so much to to kind of have this weight on their shoulder to heal it all. But the littlest thing, it will obviously have a ripple effect over time. And so we encourage that when they feel strong enough to do so, if they ever do. It's not incumbent upon them to do that, but if they do feel strong enough, we do encourage it.
All right, thank you. Colette, how do you see your work interrupting the current system of policing and incarceration?
You know, policing. So, I'm thinking about even my life. So you look at the system and it starts ground zero in the community first. And I often talk about, like here in Illinois, you hear this buzzword, reentry. How about no entry, right? So you're starting like, what are we doing in community? The organizations and how are we preventing that? So, sometimes it's so complicated because we are kind of like on the back end, the reentry part. But when I first did my prison sentence, I did my prison sentence at age 14. Had the judge, I don't know, like had the judge, or had I even told them of anything that I was experiencing, my trajectory in life could have been different and I wouldn't have cycled in and out of a system for many years. But the work that I do now, my work has always been on making sure people have some sort of freedom, even if it's after reentry. So I've helped to pass several bills in relation to jobs and housing are big. After incarceration, it's hard for people to even get housing, to find a job. So it's like, it's this permanent punishment after incarceration. If you served your time, you paid your due diligence for whatever the crime was. When I clearly know that I was just trying to survive in a community in which I lived. Okay, but so you want me to rehabilitate myself, but then when I get out, you say, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, get a job, do this, but nobody wants to hire us. Nobody wants to give us a place to live. These are basic necessities that everyone needs, everyone. And it looks different when it comes to women. So now I work in my role, with women in particular, because when you incarcerate a woman, you incarcerate the whole family. You incarcerate the community. Women are the breadwinners, most likely the breadwinners, the primary caregivers of their children. So what's going to happen to their children if they haven't a family member to care for them? And sometimes, like in my community, our family members, a lot of them look like they have backgrounds and they're not going to be able to care for the children anyway. So now the children go into foster care. Now the cycle of harm continues. But in the work that I do now at the Women's Justice Institute, we focus on the core of our work. And we had a lengthy report that came out last year, I believe it was in April, with 500 pages, 250 recommendations on how to cut the women's population 50% and beyond. And I heard you mention, Daryle, about 50% and beyond. So what happens to that other 50% in your intro? So this is a continuum, okay? You work on the 50% and you continue, and beyond is continue to work on, to build upon what you have already built. So the focus of our work focuses on health and well-being, safe and stable housing, economic security and empowerment, relationship safety, and supported families. If one of those is off, it's a potential pathway. All of them are going to be off, but it's a potential pathway for a woman to either wind up in jail or in prison. So, I mean, it's a lot that I can say, but I can't take up too much time but when we're focusing on those 5 rights and needs, we ask a woman to pick 1 or 2. And I have to always pick 1 while maybe working towards 3 because, you know, I used to get overwhelmed, especially if I didn't accomplish or just felt like a failure early on with me going back and forth to prison and jail. If I didn't accomplish something, but I know the court right now, what we do is we work with women, we walk alongside them, and who else better to help than those who have had that experience. So it's that peer-led support, building that trust, because most of us aren't very trusting anyway, because we've been hurt throughout our years, even before incarceration.
Thank you, Colette. Wonderful. That's beautiful. Well said. Olivia, how's your work interrupting the current system of policing and incarceration?
Well, there are 2 aspects. Cesare and Colette have touched on them. The one piece is being right in my relationship with everyone that I meet. That starts there, me getting myself right with all of the people that I come in contact with, you know, in addition to my family. To seek to understand, we had a saying, when you observe behavior that's not right, I always want to know what happened to you. I want to know your backstory. But those who know me know I'm a big backstory person. So that's first I want to know you better. I want to know your backstory, because if I can build relationship with you and you open up about that, then I can begin to understand you. And all the great writers, I don't care, across disciplines, will say, understanding precedes love, okay? And the expressions of authentic love. So I want to do that with everyone I meet. Now, I've sought to do that in community with others and doing joint work with people who are system impacted. When I was in Chicago, now that I'm here, a little bit here in the Valley, in Vegas, and I'm doing some things in LA, but it's always around, I'm drawn to working with system impacted people and who've come back into community, always have the same needs. You know, you both articulated that they're these basic needs, but in terms of how we view ourselves and our needs, I think we have to understand that we're all carrying trauma. The oppressor and the people who are oppressed, we're all carrying trauma, and that trauma has to be addressed. And our communities are carrying deep historic trauma, and then we're carrying our family trauma and then our individual trauma. So in my work, it's always seeking to relate to the individual or the family around what's happened and with how they're dealing with it, and trying to support working through the trauma, working toward getting to a place of healing. But of course, we all need to have our basic needs met. So we can't talk about doing the intellectual work or even the emotional work when the physical needs are there. So that has to be addressed first. We've got to find ways to get decent food and safe housing and all of those things that we all we all need and deserve as human beings. But, you know, for me, that has to be paired with the activism. You know, some of the work I did in partnership with you, Colette, and in partnership with you, Daryle, and many, many, many other people, you know, back in Chicago. The Next Movement was a part of a number of coalitions and worked in partnership with a bunch of folks to get some things accomplished, you know, to kind of pick away at this toxic system while we try to build enough community capacity to move to something new, old, fresh, the way community should be. So yeah, it's both organizing, doing advocacy, but every single person I meet, I need to look at how to build relationship, how to figure out how we can be of mutual benefit and support to one another. And how I can use whatever tools I've got in my toolkit in terms of this practice of transformative justice. Some of us are calling it some other things, really honoring the indigenous roots of this work. But yeah, using those tools on a day-to-day basis, not just with my family when I can. You know, it's harder with family, right, Colette? You need to have somebody else step in and deal with our family stuff. We're too close to it, but yeah, just applying what I know, what I've learned, and what I'm still learning to everybody I meet. Particularly, I don't know, but I am drawn to working with people who have been system impacted wherever I am. That's my community of choice. I'm going to be honest. So, yeah. That's where I'm at. That's what I've done. And that's what I'm still trying to do.
All right. Okay. So when at least around Chicago, actually around the nation, you know, noted activist and teacher and sage, when Miriam Kaba was asked about what would replace prisons, she said, "I don't know. We'll find out when we get there." So I'm gonna start with you, Colette. What does it look like for individuals and communities to interrupt their reliance on the current system of policing and incarceration?
To interrupt the policing and their reliance on policing and incarceration. You know, I visit prisons a lot. You know, my focus, I'm lobbying right now. I'm in Springfield. But what it would look like, it takes and policy changes, like folks understanding the policy realm, the importance of voting, the importance of fighting for what and asking and holding folks accountable who are put in these positions. If you vote, you're a constituent, right? What do you need in your community? In Chicago, we have no mental health facilities. All of them have been shut down. Cook County Jail, Logan Correctional have become the largest mental facilities in Illinois. I've watched this. Like when I was incarcerated, we called it the Skittle line, right? The Skittle line. People would line up to get their Skittles. Now, prisons and jails are not equipped because you get the medication, but then who are you talking to afterwards? So how do we interrupt this? How do we make sure, I think about me riding the train from the south side to the north side and back again, and what their community looks like versus ours, mine, south side. What does it look like? It's about education. So we got to educate the community. We got to build these relationships, like Miss Olivia said, being in right relationship. And you can't build a movement without starting relationships with folks. Being out there, like you can't organize behind a desk.
Mm.
You can't, it has to be done upfront and personal. Educating communities about the need and what they don't have. So I would take it back where when as a young girl, I'm an old lady now. Like, no, seriously. I thought that this is how I was supposed to going back and forth to jail and not having it. That was my way of life. That was my struggle. No. As I start educating myself, I learned and started being around people who educated me, Miss Olivia, you, Daryle, Miss Michelle, like the Nehemiah family, being around lawyers and somebody who wanted something different like me, that wasn't the way that I was supposed to be living. And we deserve better. So, you know, when you think about the violence, prisons and jails, I often thought that that was how life was supposed to be.
Hmm.
No, that's not how my life, that's not how my communities, the folks who live in my communities, it's not the way it's supposed to be. And I think once folks are educated, you know, I heard of, and I'm gonna be quiet after this, I heard like I was my last prison sentence and I'm working in commissary and the boss, the CO, correctional officer, he said, job security. And I'm packing baskets and I'm looking at all the money that's being generated that we are spending to buy all this overpriced stuff that is priced 2 times as much as in the street. He said job security. And I was like, oh my God, I'm job security.
Mm.
If I continue, I'm paying for these people's children's educations, their houses, their yachts, they all of this. So I swore and vowed that next time I go back, I'm coming in the front door and not the back. And I'm gonna be able to educate my people in the inside. And when they see me, they're gonna have hope. Some form of hope.
Excellent, excellent. Cesare, what do you think? What does it look like for individuals and communities to interrupt their reliance on the current system of policing and incarceration?
I was thinking about that as Colette was answering. And one of the things that I do want to say is I think it's our nationwide understanding of like what harm and healing looks like in different communities, where internal to certain marginalized communities, harm is like, oof, you know, it's at a different level. And then and when you look at other communities, because of resources and money and certain other things, not so much is publicized, or not so much can, you know, is even known. You know, I've worked with certain populations and I've kind of said, well, how did you get here? And it was because mom and dad paid, or mom and dad knew the local sheriff, knew the local constable, knew the local this person. And it was like, let's just push things to the side. And so it's a whole system, which is purposeful to a degree. And this particular system does not work well for communities who traditionally have had systems that worked prior to these broken systems coming in. And so, you know, just thinking about how we kind of on a judgment level say that certain harms are over certain things. And I do know that like when a community is harmed, there should be things that you're able to repair. However, it's just looking at like, what are we as a nation saying in different communities, and what is the messaging that we're saying in different communities is one thing that I'm thinking about in reference to just interrupting this piece, but also thinking about, Colette spoke about, the foster care system, and like when a mother is incarcerated, what that ripple effect does, what the ripple effect does when there's trauma that's unaddressed in a home, and how that reverberates through the community, and how there's sometimes no help in the community, So I think it's not a one answer, or a cookie cutter approach to that particular answer. I think it's a lot. I think it's our understanding that not one, like a community coming in, like I spoke to before, can't just kind of say, this is what you all need. That community should be able to kind of say, this is why we're hurt, this is why we're harming, this is why, we don't have fresh fruits and vegetables in the community, and we are now malnourished. There's a lot of things about why children go to school and have, there's violent acts of stealing, and then it kind of keeps on kind of escalating. It's not just this child is a quote unquote bad child. People don't just wake up that way. And I think that's something that we need to start thinking about as a nation, that it's not just a one particular thing where you look at, Johnny, and you're like, this is why this happened. They're like, again, so interrupting it, I think is a thing of understanding that there's a lot of harm and trauma that is just living in like the bones and the everything in the community, even down to the policing structures, that I think there could be other ways, that there's definitely other ways if we look at the history of how, the police state came to us. And many times, even when you go into communities on the other side of the track or the other side of the train, everything, they work within their communities as much as possible. And the police are kind of there just because they're there and because that's what we think needs to be done. But, before that, there was like grandma, auntie, godmother, this person down the block, Miss Jane, Miss Mary, that would kind of just look out. And that was the structure. That was the restorative justice. That was the everything. And it might have been a school teacher. It might have been a dance teacher. It might have been everybody or anybody to speak to, hey, you're being a little too loud. There's somebody older that's, that is interrupting and looking at like how and why these systems came to us and how broken and how disruptive they are to many families. A lot of the systems are more harmful than anything. Colette spoke to that. They're so harmful that it's like you can't even figure out how to start where the harm begins and ends. If we look at more indigenous places, they're figuring it out. They don't have a foster care system. They don't have, and they do have folks that are, without parent, whether that be, through somebody's passing, and the community takes care of them because the community knew the parent. So that's my answer. That's the long answer, but I think it's just kind of looking at how harmful the systems are.
Yeah. So Olivia, I'm going to give you an option here. You can dig into that same question, or we can move to a new question. What do you think?
Well, it depends on what the new question is, Daryle Brown.
Well, you're going to love it.
I want to say a little bit, just to
Okay.
piggyback a little bit on what Cesare and Colette had to say, because I'm an elder, the elder of this group, clearly. I want to say that it's all rooted in community. I know what community felt like when I was a girl growing up in Chicago. I know what community was like for my mom but she talked about it, and my aunts growing up in Nashville, they talked about it a lot. I know what community was like for my dad and his cousins who grew up in New Orleans. And we've moved far from that in a short period of time. And my understanding is that this movement is by design. Our condition is by design. And so I think for me, as much as I can, for those who are open, I want them to understand how we got here. To me, that's first. I think it's important for people to understand that this is not the way it's supposed to be. It is this way by design, and why it's this way by design. So we have to know a little bit of our history. Okay, we got to have the backstory to understand how we got here. As Audre Lorde said, and Rumi said, you know, if the house isn't right, you got to tear it down and build something new. I say build something new, but that's old. It's rooted in indigenous ways, and it's rooted in how some of us remember community. We're old enough to know what community was like. We policed ourselves. We took care of ourselves. We didn't call 911. We took care of it within our community, within our block, and so forth. So I think we need to educate and then re-educate ourselves. And I know that's not easy, about how we need to be with one another in community. I believe there are places where this is happening. It's beginning to happen. So I think that's one of the ways forward. We have to be very intentional about rebuilding community the way it should be, and it's possible. It's happening in many places. It's happening in other places around the world, places that have been devastated, have been colonized. You know, I was thinking to go back to their original way of being in community, with a lot of reliance on their understanding, their cosmologies, and their understanding of the power within the spiritual plane. So that's kind of how I want to say that. Miriam Kaba her book is amazing for those who haven't read it or aren't familiar with it. Maybe not everybody knows who Miriam Kaba is, but I call her a goddess with a small g. People in Chicago, particularly young people, she did really transformative work, and she left tools behind for many of us to use in our work. Amazing tools to deal with trauma, to deal with youth violence, and a bunch of other things. Amazing institutions that are still going. Project NIA, the Chicago Freedom School, and other things. So we've got to, as community, we've got to build our own institutions based on our value system. We've got some institutions already, but I mean, we've got to collectively work on building and sustaining institutions that are going to take care of it. It's got to be contextual. It's got to be from the ground up. It's got to be created by community, you know. So if I've taken too much time, you want to move on to the other question and start with Cesare or Colette, you're fine to do so, Daryle.
No, I'm gonna give you this question.
So it is 7:30. I know we said that look, so yeah, I've been in Springfield all day. I haven't eaten. So let's stick to the time. Just keeping us on track here. Because we can talk about this all day long.
So yes, indeed. So let me thank you, Colette. So we want to reserve some space for Q&A. But I do want to respect the flow, because where I want to move us is, you know, the next question deals with, we can kind of see this future, right? A lot of people fear this future. So I wanted to give folks a chance to briefly maybe disperse some of the myths and fears that surround what alternatives may come, okay? So that's like the very next thing. And then after that, what I want us to do is move into opportunities for our participants and our guests. What might they do to become participants in this future, this alternative future that we envision, because we're kind of in the mix, and we do this work because we have this hope and this anticipation of blessed community that's going to come about because of the work we're doing. So deal with the fears that people may have surrounding alternatives. You know, what happens when the prisons go? What happens when we right-size the police? What is the impact? Why are people so afraid? And what people can do if they want to get on this train, if they want to join us in the battle, right? So you can kind of combine those, or you can just briefly hit on the fears. I'm going to start with you, Olivia. And we're going to give ourselves 10 minutes to cover all of this. Then we're going to go to Q&A.
Well, fear comes out of ignorance. It's also the fear around tearing down these systems is because there are people who are going to lose their power and their reason, all of that. We know all of that. So naturally, I say you can't worry about them. Let's organize, from back in the day, and organizing today is you organize, even though there may be some differences around common needs. So you pull people in around those common needs that we all have as community. You organize in that way and build power with between groups that might seem so different. We have a history of doing that in Chicago and other places. So I say you're not going to pull everybody in. Pull in more people who have the same needs as we do. And I'm also about, while you're doing that, re-educating people. I'm big on, trying to help people understand how we got here. And for me, a new thing, and maybe we don't quite know what it would look like, it can't be worse than this, because this isn't working for the majority of us, okay? So the only people who are going to be fearful are the people who perceive that they're going to lose something. And at this point, I think we're at a tipping point. It may not feel like it, but I think we're kind of at a tipping point. That's why there's all of this chaos. I think it's beginning to shift. And so we've got to stay the course. I think I answered all of your question. Did I or did I not? Was that?
You're good. Cesare? So the question deals with, what do you think are some of the fears that people have? And then how can people engage in this work? The folks that have spent this last hour with us.
So yeah, I want to just everything that we've spoken about, everything that's been mentioned, and I do believe that the fear is also rooted in ignorance. I think it's a fear in there's a lot of people that are benefiting from this system and systems, that all of the other systems that trickle down from it. There's a whole host of people. There's a whole communities. There's whole families many times that are not sure how, and they will admittedly say this. What happens if the jails close? My father, my grandfather, my sister, this person, they've been the cook, they've been this. There's whole families that are supported off of this carceral system, and just very unclear about what that would look like, because that has been the lineage of how they have brought their family through tougher times, possibly. So I do think it's education. I do think it's also peeling back the layers for them. And so it's not just ripping, like this whole system is not just going to close tomorrow. So as we are thinking about how we are unpacking this, there has to be things in place for those folks who are benefiting from it as well, whether it be financial, economic, whatever. And what can we do? I think, as fast as it's growing, it's as fast as it's coming down as well. And so I do agree that we are at a tipping point. I do agree that there is a fear of like the unknown. And I think that those that are impacted by it are not afraid of the unknown, because we're clear that there has to be something else. Like this, because this isn't working. You see the wreckage. There has to be something else.
All right, Colette.
Yeah, I think, the fear is rooted in false narratives. The fear is rooted in biases, sexism, racism, bigotry, all of those things. And we have to educate our communities, build a base, those who have the same self-interest, and create allies. Most importantly, I mean, it starts with educating your community, but it's a lot of policies that are put in place to keep us oppressed. Administrative policies, attacking the systems that were created and built to keep us marginalized and oppressed, like, the DCFS, and like, what are those systems built? And it takes like conversations being had in the community and educating community. But I'm not afraid. Like, we're working on a bill right now. This is our fact sheet, and I was talking about it earlier, and it's a bill of justice for survivors of gender-based violence. But like women, you're Miriam Cava, you mentioned, like, I remember she talked about Celia and no self left to defend. And what does that look like? When we stand up for ourselves and can't defend for ourselves, and we're just, but I'm still here fighting, and we have to continue the fight, no matter what the false narratives may be. It's like never giving up, keeping hope alive.
Okay, so we are, I think, at the end of our formal questions. I've got some other things that I would ask, but I'm going to give the audience an opportunity to use the Q&A feature to go in and ask some questions. The first question, RJ Mangan has had their question up for quite some time. And it says, I've heard some speak of a prison industrial complex that encourages the maintenance of the current system, that profit is a major factor in keeping it as it is. Does that impact the creation of new systems? If so, how? And Cesare, you had some pretty good response to that just in your response earlier. Talking about, when you close a prison, you have a whole town that basically was supported by that prison. What are we going to do with them? And, at times in my life, I've had very calloused answers to that, but now that I'm more of a restorative personality, I would say, train them. What if all those prison guards, when the prison was announced it was closed, they were all trained in restorative practices and put back into communities where they could be of service? What about that? But I'll give everybody else a chance to speak their piece. Cesare, your mic is open.
No, I you answered, yeah. So I think there's that, what you said. I think there's the same things that folks have to do when they've been incarcerated for 18 years. They have to figure out, it's not I have to figure out a way, but there's systems right now that we have to unpack it. And so they're having to go back to a community with nothing. So I think there has to be a middle point of that, their reentry back into the community minus the jail. So the community might not be the jail. Do they need other things? Is it farming land? Is there other things that would just be the support, economic support of the community, of not incarcerating folks as your main source of income? I mean, I think that's just like, I don't have as many years in you as Daryle, but I think that's just insanity, to feel that folks should just be farmed into these places and then kind of think, well, what are we going to do if the jails close? To me, that's just like a mind-blowing thing.
Yeah, not a moral dilemma, is it?
I don't think there should be.
Colette?
I've seen this when I was housed at Decatur, and Decatur holds the moms and babies unit, and they were being threatened of closing. Now, the moms and babies unit, this is how we're keeping our jobs. Look, I've seen COs, correctional officers, come in there as young folk, fresh out of high school. I would encourage them to continue to educate themselves so they can get a better job other than a CO. I don't know, but I don't feel it's our job to make you comfortable while our communities aren't comfortable with the maintenance of mass incarceration. That's just how I feel. And I'm not saying that I don't sympathize with that's all they have in their community is a prison and a Walmart, but I don't know, fight for more in your community. Like when you look at rural areas and how women have to be in compliance with certain stipulations that are put, like even if it's treatment, they have nothing in rural areas. They have to travel 2 hours to get to a treatment center. Educate yourself on what is needed, have some compassion and care, and try to build this in your community so your community is thriving, and get another job other than corrections. I really don't care personally if they don't, or they out of a job. I'm just being honest. And Daryle, you say you changed because you're a restorative justice practitioner. Yes, I don't care. I don't I'm sorry. That's my 2 cents.
No, I hear you. Olivia?
Just quickly, I would say, as human beings, we get really anxious about change, but we're in an era where there are all of these new things that we can do, where people can make a decent living. I mean, to me, that's a no-brainer. You get rid of the carceral system. There are all of these other ways that people can make a better, more dignified way of taking care of yourself and your family. I know a couple of people, lovely people, who did corrections in California, and they're lovely people. But I cringe when I hear them talk about some of the things they had to do. It's just, how can you be your elevated self when you're doing something like that? It's gotta weigh on you on a spiritual level, I would say. So I'm not worried about that. There are plenty of ways in this country that we can redo the economy, but there's this struggle to hold on to the old stuff because a handful of people can still squeeze. We don't want to get into this conversation, but folks, this is all about economics, right? This 500-year experiment, right? So if we understand what's at the root of it, what's behind it, that helps us see what we need to do to move forward. Okay.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
we've got to pull this away from a handful of folks and entities so that we can all live together in a better way as human beings, human to human. Such, all of this making money off of these dehumanizing systems, and it's just unacceptable. But hopefully enough of us will get on board and we will really actualize this critical mass that I think is almost here and move forward.
So again, for the audience, use the Q&A if you have any questions. One more question for our panel while we wait to see if we get any audience questions. How can churches and community members participate in the creation of these alternative systems? And this might be a very personal question. Maybe you have an organization that you can recommend people connect with, whatever you think, to give people a venue for getting involved in the future.
Mm.
Oh,
You know, Daryle, so churches and communities, I'm more of a spiritual person. I grew up Catholic. So I was so messed up by the Catholic Church. I was so messed up by Catholic school and how I would get whipped with paddles and long boards and all that. I mean, I was just so much messed up by that religion. I think, as human beings, it's about doing the right thing for the right reason. It's about doing the right thing for the right reason. And like I was trained, Miss Olivia spoke on it. How are we living in right relationship with one another? Doing the right thing for the right reason. Now, those who are in the church or, religious, like ethically and morally, like what is doing the right thing for the right reason?
Yeah.
I don't know, not being judgmental. I don't know. Yeah.
just want to echo what Colette said. What I was going to say also was very much in line with what Colette said before she said it, was not doing stuff just to sleep at night. And so I think sometimes, even if you step away from this carceral, piece, and we're looking at a lot of like what's done on social media, and folks will take pictures of them doing stuff for certain people who are just suffering. And if it's you giving them a sandwich, that doesn't need to be publicized. You do it and you just do it. And wherever that energy goes, I believe that it'll come back to you, but kind of like you're taking a picture to show it to who, or to collect it for what, or you're going to, I've seen certain religious institutions come into shelters that I've worked at and take a picture, like, hey, take a picture serving. And I'm saying, but why? Folks are hurting. So if you're wanting to come and serve and come and donate and come and do, you should be, like what Colette said, should be doing it for the right reasons. And that right reason shouldn't be because you want to sleep at night. It shouldn't be so you can post on social media or take back to your friends, take back to your families, because these are still all connected. The shelter system and the substance abuse system, the child, they're all connected to the carceral system. And they really are just like drippings of those systems. And you should be doing it because that's the right thing to do, and not because anybody's looking, not because anybody's watching, not because of anything else, but because it's the right thing to do. Yes, will it help you at night? I'm sure it will, but that shouldn't be the driving force, that you're just doing stuff once a year because it's Christmas, or because, it's only Thanksgiving, or we just need to help these folks because it's such a bad, dire straits. What happens to all the other 364 days of the year when folks in community are hurting? Your intent has to be like really real and genuine, because what we do know about these communities, they're able to clearly tell who's really in it with them. And that you're not just there checking off a box, getting a check, just doing something, and then saying, oh, well, I help these folks and I help. We're clear about that when that comes in. So that's some of my thoughts. That was long-winded, but that was some of my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. So James has his question. He says, I was in a conversation this morning about the pros and cons of protesting Cop City here in Atlanta. And one of the pastors I was talking with said that we need to think about what's possible. The question is, what is possible in terms of reforming our justice system? And is that the right question? Now I'm going to ask Olivia to respond to this. And I would just say that we can't see, you get trapped in thinking about what folks may think is possible. As I think, as Cesare was saying, we need to focus on what is the right thing to do and keep pressing that. And I'll ask Olivia to respond to that also.
Yeah, to me, that's kind of a trick question, because it's not about reformation, it's about transformation. It's about being and doing what is just and what is right. But again, we're standing on top of 500 years of deeply embedded falsehood and lies. So, we kind of don't know another way. Most people kind of can't see another way, but we have to show them another way, because this is not sustainable. I think thinking people realize this is not sustainable. We're coming to the end of the road with this. Okay, so yeah, that would be my answer. We've got to do this other thing, because what we've got's not working. It's yeah, I won't say we're in the, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you, Cesare, for responding to Abraham's question. I'm going to throw it out to the group in case someone else has a response they'd like to share. Abraham says, I understand that doing this type of work can often yield little victory because of the way the system is structured. That being said, how do you remain persistent and hopeful in your line of work? Anybody want to respond to that?
I've got a real quick response. In getting into Indigenous wisdom, I came across this 500-year prophecy, and I've been hearing it more, seeing it more. The Indigenous groups of the Americas say that we are now in the next 500 years. We had this horrific thing that happened 500 years ago, where our way of life was destined, all of this. Okay, now we're in the next 500 years, and we are in the age of transformation. And the symbolism is the eagle and the condor. And the eagle from the north and the condor from the south will meet together. And at that point, things will be transformed. And then the hummingbird will emerge. I hear some of them say that. So yeah, I feel that we're in this next place. And not that it's going to be easy. A luta continua, the struggle will always, yes. But I think we're in this exciting new phase. And people, Indigenous people, people of color, I think many feel it.
All right. Up, I see Jess has joined us. I'm thinking she's gonna pull our plug.
Well, we're wrapping up our time, and it's so hard to close us because this has been such a wonderful, wonderful space of sharing wisdom and expertise. So I just want to thank you all so much again for the ways that you are leading this work. We are honored to be with you this evening to learn from you and wish you many blessings as you continue this work. And want to say thank you to everyone joining us again. Thank you for spending your evening with us. It is an honor to share our evening together. And would just remind you that the recording will go out to everyone who has signed up, and we still have room and availability for folks who are interested in the Pipeline to Prison Learning Tours. Just to Colette, I loved one of the things that you said, you know, you can't learn this stuff from behind a desk. You got to get up front and personal. And I thought that's what the learning tours are, right? Like, we want people to engage this information and live it in an embodied way. So we invite you to join us in that kind of embodied learning experience. We have our last session of the webinar in 2 weeks from this evening, as we will hear one more time from a set of practitioners engaged in the work. So we look forward to having everyone join us again in 2 weeks. Thank you again so much, Cesare, Colette, Olivia, and Daryle. Thank you so much. And have a wonderful evening, everyone.